GKrellM is an open source and a cross-platform system monitor, and you'll see it here, this little window over here that I'm showing just on the right of my Conky window. The one is really an alternative for the other, and I have done a previous video on Conky here on the left. I'll put a link in the top right as well as below in the description. They are fairly equivalent, and I have tried to reproduce more or less what I already am using in Conky on GKrellM. I'll sort of end this video really trying to give a sort of a summarized view of some of the pros and cons of each, and while I'm not 100% decided yet which one I really want to use. Well, I could use both, I suppose. But for those of you that are more into doing a GUI type graphical user interface, GKrellM might be quite a good option for you to consider, versus of course Conky that is purely config file based. But I think let's just have a look at one or two issues first before we jump into exploring its interface. So just starting with the name, GKrellM, there it is. It's a system monitor. The name is actually sort of an acronym produced from the G for GNU or GTK, the graphical toolkit that's used to develop it. The Krell part is a little bit two-sided, but from their frequently asked questions, they actually state there from the movie Forbidden Planet, where the Krell had a room with wall-to-wall meters for monitoring their power systems. There is a sort of another meaning of Krell apparently, as I understand it. Certain of these sort of monitor overlays you get where you're adjusting your settings and so on, it can show things like a CPU bar or something, across the top of the monitor, apparently also called Krells. But you'll see at the bottom here, coming from their frequently answered questions, this is what they state is the meaning of Krell. And M is monitors or meters. They don't specify really which, it can be either or. And you'll see here, if you look at each of these over here is a monitor or a meter. Some people actually refer to these as Krells, but I see from their help documents that Krells can actually be these smaller details like the overlay for the memory figure and 5% up there for the CPU. So I might interchangeably talk about monitors and Krells and so on, but that's what I mean. And then just to talk briefly about the startup, there is something interesting here. So yes, it'll work as a client application, and you can of course specify with a -c and a suffix name, whichever name you want to give them. You can also specify alternative config files. So you can fire up Krell, with a particular config, or fire up a different config in another GKrellMon application. So that does give you a little bit of flexibility. And the next two options here are interesting, the -s and the -p, small letter s and a capital letter P, because you can also run Krell on one machine and have that basically be a server, for example. So it could be another desktop computer on your LAN at home, on your home network. Then on your main machine where you want to monitor from, you will actually fire up your GKrellM-S and you'll use that IP address there as the host name, or possibly if it's on the internet. Don't know if that's going to be a great idea because you've got to share it outwards with its port, and I didn't see anything like login IDs and names. But essentially that will be the host name that you'd reach it at. And the -p, if applicable, is going to be the server port that is being shared on that server instance. So you'd have a -s host name, -p server port, if necessary. So just bear in mind, I'm not going to show the client server model here, but it can operate that way as well if you want to. So it's quite a useful thing. And then just to mention, it's got a ton of plugins actually, which does make it quite easy to expand functionality. Many of them are at this address over here. And this is actually a resource explaining to programmers how to configure plugins or to, set up plugins as well. So it's of a bit of interest maybe to read through it. But there's quite a long sort of a selection of plugins over there as well, worth considering. And then for Arch anyway, I'm using Manjaro Linux. So on the AUR, there's a couple of plugins as well, about 10 or so plugins. All you have to do is just install those, and after you've restarted GKrellM, you'll see those plugins are available. I can just say not everything works 100%. Some are quite old, some will still work fine, but one or two didn't work fine for me. So your mileage is going to vary a little bit on that one. And you can also just try doing a general search, or on GitHub, you can just search for something like GKrellM plugin. And you'll also very invariably find a whole bunch of these plugins available to, quickly extend the functionality. And just the last thing before we jump into the user interface then, I've got a sort of a side-by-side comparison here because I am running a equivalent sort of GKrellM as well as Conky at the same time. On the CPU front, they both consume 0.1%, which are both incredibly light. It is just periodically though, as for example, my Conky only does a read every 5 seconds. GKrellM, I'm not 100% sure, but it also comes on and off, just showing 0.1% when it does actually do a read. On the memory front, yes, it does appear GKrellM is using 25 megs, while Conky is using 7 megabytes. And in the equivalent, which is resident memory, GKrellM is using 70 megabytes, whilst Conky is using about 18. So, it looks like the one is double or triple the other, but bear in mind that's an incredibly small amount of memory anyway as it is. And both of these, or all of these, are going to vary. Obviously, the more monitors you've got set up on each of them, they're going to use a bit more memory and resources. So, just to bear in mind. I don't think there's much really to worry about here as far as any differences are concerned. So let's jump in and have a look at the user interface itself. So if you've started up GKrellM, or you've auto started up your system, you'll see something like this. And you can, if you hover over some of these things, you'll see the monitors, you'll see there is a bit of additional information sometimes. I'm just not seeing much on these. The way to get to the config is you right click here at the top, and there are two main options you'll be concerned about, or you'll be wanting to look at, and that is configuration and theme. And maybe before we jump into the configuration, let's have a look at the themes then. You can obviously go to next, previous, next theme, alternative, scale themes up and down. There's a couple of options in reload over there. This is just a quick change. For example, you might just have 3 or 4 or 6, themes loaded. I've got a whole stack of them and I'll never find my way back, so I'm not going to use this one. If I go to configuration, you can see here that that's obviously the main config that opens. And if you go down to the bottom over here, you'll see there are themes over there. I'm using at the moment the Cobalt theme, and I think this was installed from the AUR. It was just additional themes, and they all appear, you'll see them here at the bottom. This is actually where they are installed physically on the computer, and just bear in mind that, obviously if you're using Windows or Mac, this is going to look a little bit different, these addresses, but the principle remains the same. So Cobalt is what I'm using, and you'll see if I click over here, it does do an instant change, and there's really an incredible number of themes. So you just got to find something that works for you. Some of the contrasts don't always work, well for you. And when I say there's a lot, I mean there's probably about 50 or 60 here, so it's an endless number. Cobalt just worked quite well for me. Cheese, there's Cobalt. But, if I go down, I can just shoot down to the bottom here and have a look. There's actually, that's not a bad one either, I suppose. But you just want to make sure all your details come out right. So let's just go back to Cobalt. For me, as I said, that was the better one. There's a couple of options here as well. You can try and get it to change along with this is for Linux, I suppose, the GTK theme changes. You can adjust your main fonts, and there's a little bit of information there as well. And that's really sort of it for the font side. Let's just look at the general options first. You can tick on and off things like the host name display over here at the top. Maybe just let me bring this up a little bit. And I can maybe just go in a bit closer here. So you can see there the host name can just be turned on and off, and it'll see it going on and off there. The system name display, remember the screen location at exit and move it at the next startup. You can then also toggle multiple instances if you want to have 2 or 3 different GKrellMs running, with different things, or maybe you want to break this up into sort of smaller ones and run it like that. The other one I did use quite a bit here was obviously the width as well, just to get this width right. And it's quite nice because it's interactive. You can see it changing, as you adjust it there. 170 worked well for me. And then these Krell and LED updates, that is these updates here. So if this number is too low, it's going to use a lot more intensive resources on your system. Like I said, my Conky is running every 5 seconds. So I have set the Krells and the LED updates to be every 5 seconds as well. If you find your machine is a bit slower, you can even change this to 6 or 7 or so. You can just experiment with that, really. Then, okay, I'm not going to go into every one of these, but sticky states, you can keep it on top of other windows. I'm quite happy to have it below, or you can have it set below other windows of the same type. There's a bunch of different options here about how your window is going to appear. And then the info, just as a matter of interest, the info does usually give you quite a lot of additional online help. So things like chart labels. This is actually quite useful, and we'll come to them when I show the alarms as well, because these are variables that can be used in your alarm setting as well. Panel labels. There's commands that can be fired off as well, and it'll show a little button, and you can just click it to quick launch certain things, and of course your general mouse button actions. Then what we've got here is there's a couple of built-in sensors that you've got already, and these are additional plugins that I added here at the bottom. But as far as the built-in sensors go, these are the options for the built-in sensors. So things like sensors, you'll see on Linux, I've got a bunch of different temperatures and other things. The key ones I wanted to show was things like the consolidated CPU, not the different cores. You can if you want to. It's just going to get a bit more busy. You can see there on the left. I've got GPU temperature, and I've got the NVMe, which is my NVMe drive. That's fairly critical for me to monitor because those drives can overheat if you run them very hard. So that's of interest for me to watch. And while we're on it, I'm going to show the alarms right here while I'm there. You can see here's an indication that there's some alarm set. And we can test these alarms. If I just put my speaker sound on, I can test this probably by just setting the CPU warning temperature. It's at the moment on 53, but if I go to alerts, so the A is indicating alert here. If I click on that, you'll see for this particular sensor, the CPU sensor, I can set a high limit with an alarm, and I can set a high warning as well. In other words, when it triggers past 75, this warning is going to go off. When it goes past 85, it's going to trigger the high alarm limit. So you've got two different alarms. I've also said that the alarm limit must exist for 45 seconds before it actually triggers. So because of that, I think let me just quickly change this so that it was on 75. Let me just make this, it's on 55 now, so I'll make it 54 and apply. So the 45 seconds will be counting down now. And for the high alarm, I've got it playing a little script file which will trigger a script file that just plays a siren sound for me, really. And it will repeat every 20 seconds. What should trigger just now is the warning, because it's already above that amount, except that the CPU amount has dropped. So I think let me just make this even lower. What's going to happen, what you can watch out for, is you will see a physical sign over here on the CPU. So it will change color over here to indicate, and it's going to play the warning sound as
warning. CPU is at 53.8 degrees.
Okay, so there it read it out, and it should actually be repeating. Let's see, I don't want to change that one now.
Warning, CPU is at 53.8 degrees.
Okay, let's just put that back again so that it stops the warning now. But it's triggering for the warning, it's triggering this line, and essentially all it's really triggering is that's just running, starting a shell up, connected or disconnected shell, so it runs in the background, and it's going to then execute this command here, everything from the started inverted commas to where the inverted commas end. It's going to echo and it'll be speaking then, as you've just heard, warning, CPU is at, and the $S is the variable. So it's picking up whatever the actual temperature is and then telling me that, saying degrees, and it is piping it. That echo command is piped through to the eSpeak command. The reason why is the eSpeak is the thing that actually generates the synthesized sound. And I'm just using English, I forget what the -S and the G are. They are pitch and speed of speaking. I'll put these commands as well below the video. And I will also put an example of my play alarm sound. Although the play alarm sound, as I said, is just going to trigger a sound effect in the background. That's really all it's going to be doing. But one thing I want to say about alarms, I think what is useful here is that with Conky, for example, it doesn't trigger, well, you can actually trigger alarms, that you'd have to set everything up manually in the config file, also executing these scripts with lots of if, then, do, else commands, I think. This is a pretty easy way of doing it. So from an ease of use point of view for setting up alerts, GKrellM is actually probably quite easy. Then just one or two other things here with regards to setting up that sensor. That's obviously the technical word for the sensor there that it uses, but you can actually type in the description here, and I just put in CPU, so that's what you'll see on the monitor, and it's a bit easier to understand sometimes. So that's where you adjust that. The factor and the offsets are just if your temperatures are not correct or the readings aren't correct or whatever, you can give an offset over here just to adjust those temperatures if you need to. Then under options, that's of course where you're going to set Fahrenheit or Celsius, whether you want to show the units or not, normal with labels or compact without labels. That's the description, I think, on the left there. I haven't actually used the daemon port. And then again, once again, you've got the help that you can read here, and that's where the $S came for the sensor value and the label. So that really is the temperature sensors. The clock setting, well, that is up over here. And again, I've just changed the formatting a little bit to allow for the ISO standard for time that we use. And, you can format day, month, year, month, day, whatever you want to over here, really. It's just a matter of changing these strings here as far as you want. And you can obviously enable them or disable them as well. If you wanted to, you could put in commands here for chiming. Again, you'd be executing a little script file or something like that just to run the chime. I see it's got a... oh, that's looping the chime sound. And then again, you've got a little bit of help and information there. For the CPUs, this is actually for the graph here that's being displayed. And yeah, clicking on the graph, you can also see that it enables and disables some information there. If you want to get to these settings quickly, you can also, of course, just right-click on any one of these and it'll open up the screen immediately for you. But you've got a couple of other options here you can set. I've gone for the composite CPU for the graph. Otherwise, I'm going to have like 16 threads, which can be a bit confusing, but I mean, I suppose you could. You see it's going to put separate ones there, and that's going to get a bit busy. The format for the string, that is the chart label, which is the $T, which you're seeing over there, that little 2 and 4%. You can also put commands in there to be executed, and you'd click on there to execute them, as well as alerts. Now, I don't have an alert set for that, but you could set an alert for it, and that $T is the total CPU time percentage usage. So that's what you're seeing over there on the left. Then you can also put processes chart on, but I found this wasn't really that useful or meaningful for me. I don't really want to see the number of processes and users and so on. So I actually left that off. But yeah, there is the setup for formatting, and it gives you a bit of information there as well about that chart. The disk one I am using, I'm just showing the amount of activity on my NVMe drive, and that is this one over here, this little chart over there. So you can just toggle these on and off whichever drives you want to show. And I've also got my ZRAM swap in the RAM. It's a virtual drive, so that can actually also be shown, which is this one over there. So the name is below what you're looking at over there. And again, there's your setup. You can set whatever chart label you want to appear, and there's the description of the labels. Internet, let's just go down a little bit. Oops. Internet is going to be this one. Oh, sorry. Internet is actually not that one. Let me just double check here. I don't think I've got internet on at the moment. Let me just quickly check. Oh, it shows the TCP port hits. That's right. So I'm not actually worrying with that. But if you are interested, you can monitor particular ports on your machine and you can see how active they are. Maybe the FTP port, you want to see how active or what's happening on it or something as well there. So that could be of use to people. I'm not really, as I said, making use of that. And you can add multiple ports there. Just remember, it's going to get busy. The net is the, sorry, let me just try and line this up here. But this is the network interface activity. So you can enable a timer button. You can show seconds and start and stop commands and so on. But essentially my main interface, my Ethernet interface is this one. So you can enable or disable it. And you can force the chart to be shown if the interface is not rooted. So, in other words, these things can dynamically appear or not, depending on whether they are in use or not. You can also execute and launch commands. For example, I've got Proton VPN. I've got that enabled, but one could also disable that. There is my Proton VPN activity. It is actually running in the background. So these are just the various other virtual interfaces and so on. And again, you can set some alerts, so that can be of use as well. You can set a high or low alert on the particular interfaces to monitor and alert you of anything as well. So that's another handy little feature. And these are all just, sort of quick and easy to set, really. Oh, the other thing I can just point out here is on this interface, you'll see I've inverted the graph. It's on the display part. If you right click on there, there is some additional setting here, and you'll see I've inverted it. So if I tick the invert on and off, you can see now that the split display here is going to come on and disappear. You see there it's superimposed, and if I invert it, it's at the top. The one that I chose at the top is the RX. So the RX is inverted. Sorry, you can invert either or both. But why I did it is receiving is download, so it points downwards. That's the easy way for me to remember that at the top is the download. And the TX is what's going up or out at the bottom there. So you can adjust your resolution and your number of grids and chart height and so on. So that's the display part. Memory is this over there that you can see at the moment. Now, unfortunately, here's a difference. Whereas you'll see on the left over here, just to the left of my cursor there, Conky can actually show you things like bars. GKrellM doesn't do that. What you have got though is, and it's going to be a bit difficult to see here, but you'll see a little, I don't know what to call it, like a little inverted pointer. It's sitting here above the M where my cursor is at the moment, and it'll jump up and down here every now and again. That in essence is sort of like a bar chart, a bar graph. It is jumping up and down to reflect usage. Like the swap file, if you look over here for the drives, these percentages, I think, are supposed to correspond. You'll see it jumps up here every now and again. That's not to me the same as having the bar graph, though, for Conky. So in that regard, Conky is for me a little bit easier visually to maybe see what's going on. But what I've tried to do is I've tried to expand here. So it says mem is 37% used of 32 gigs. You can turn on and off things like the swap meter, the meter here, and there's a couple of other setup. So that description that you're seeing over here, the mem percentage and so on, is this over here that you can see there, the format string. So much used of, and those variables will be here under info. That's where you'll get them. So you can choose, from anything over there and quickly configure that any way you want. Maybe you want this a little bit lighter. I just like to see the total as well, especially for the drive space, not maybe so much for the memory. That's the memory. The file system is the next part. So that's these that you're seeing. Memory and swap is the memory part. The part that you're seeing over here where it says data drive, boot drive, and backup drive, that is so much percentage used of whatever my total is. Then you can actually see here under setup, I've got a format string for the panel labels, and I'm using $L and $U. And you'll see here is the explanation. Panel label, $U is used percentage. And where you're going to select each one is if you just expand primary here, you'll see that is where you can actually select, for example, that first one that I showed you here, data, 74% used. All I really did is you can give it any label or description you want here, so just to make it easier for yourself. The important part is to choose whichever mount point you actually want. So in my case, it's the home/home partition. You can also have ejectable and mount commands, but that, I do everything in the FS tab anyway. But the important part then is probably the alerts. So you can also set the alerts here, which I have set up. Remember now, you're not seeing that sort of easy green-red color that Conky is showing you. So again, you have got the high warning alert, 80%, or high alarm limit I've set for 90% use. In this case, I'm just going to play those script files that plays a warning warble sound or an alarm sound, really. And it'll repeat every, 2 minutes. This one is every 3 minutes. It'll repeat while those thresholds are exceeded. So that is a very useful thing, again, to have an audible alarm. Even though this is sitting behind other windows, you'll be alerted immediately that there is actually a problem. Visually, again, if I was to, I think my data drive is 74 at the moment. Is that right? 74. If I made this, for example, 50 and applied it, there's the warning sound. And, well, it's only going to sound every 2 minutes, but you'll see there is a visual indicator as well. So if you go to your GKrellM, you're going to obviously see what the alert is, and then the audible sound will just keep repeating, of course. So let me just put that back to 80. Otherwise, I'm going to have it going off all the time. So you can do that for each of your drives. You can set up the alerts independently as well, which is quite useful. Mail I'm not using, but you could be using this to do POP3 or IMAP mail checks, and then it'll also sort of alert you. Here it's got a little envelope, and it'll give you some stats about your unread mail. There's all the various mail settings. It's by default we'll be using the Unix mail, I suppose, but there's different animations and other settings as well. So you could use this as well to check your email. Battery, well, I haven't got a laptop, but this is where you'd set up for the laptop. And you'll see again alerts that you can set up. There's some information, and of course you can use the variables again as well. The uptime is just showing really the uptime. Here at the bottom you'll see it says 0 days, 6 hours and 51 minutes. The machine has been up. You can execute commands, but it's basically just a toggle really. So the other interesting thing then to have a look at is the plugins, and you'll see here is the Sun plugin. Now we're going to have to move this up a little bit. So try and get these, aligned again. Obviously you're going to want to put in some rough latitude, longitude, so that it figures out your sun correctly. And you'll also notice if you look carefully here, it shows you the track of the sun, where the sun rises, where it is at noon, and you'll see it's just past noon at the moment. It is about 4 o'clock, I think, at the moment. Oh, and you can also get it to toggle like this to the moon. It'll show you what tonight's moon is going to be, with all the stats as well for the moon if you hover over it. But if I do click to see the sun again, that is your sunrise and sunset time. I forget what the 257 was. I think it was something to do with the moon, in fact. But here we go. You can set here the 15 minutes to toggle between sun and moon images. You can tick various things on and off here, show what change to moon at night. Then it's not going to show the sun, obviously. And yeah, various other settings here. And there's a lot of info as well that you can have a look at for the sun clock. So that is an extra plugin. The other one I've got here is for virtualization, I think. I don't think I'm using this one though. Oh yes, I am actually. So this is an interesting one. Here, if you look over here where my cursor is moving at the moment, I am showing the top 3 processes. It's the equivalent to, if we look at Conky, where have I got that on Conky? I think it's down here. The top processes on Conky. This is really what you're seeing with this plugin. I just want to try and get this to fit together here. I'm not going to get this to work. Oh, I'll sort of get it to work. So you can decide how many processes. I think it only allows for 3 maximum. So it's, 1, 2, or 3. This is quite interesting here. only show processes above, and I've got above 0. Now this goes in 1% increments, so you can't say 0.1%, but if you had this on 1%, it's only going to show you, it'll actually be blank here unless, or it's not going to display any new processes unless it exceeds that. So it stops something being very, very busy, for example. The other thing that's important is the frequency of updates in 5 seconds. So the point is that you don't want this updating maybe too quickly. If it's going to be every second, it's going to be accurate, but you're hardly going to see anything. You won't be able to read anything. So I did turn that down a little bit. You can exclude, if you put in a regex over here, you can exclude certain processes, or for example, use the idle to exclude anything that's idle. So there's a couple of things that one can play around with here as well, but that is an additional plugin. So GKrell Top is the plugin if you're looking for that one. I do like that because I like to keep an eye on what is actually consuming sort of heavy resources at the moment. Just remember, if I'd said only show 1% or above, the ones that are showing now, you're hardly going to see them because they're not going to display. It'll just be blank. So I have got it above 0 at the moment. Then multi-ping was another one that I've got, and if I go down to where, there we go, ping time, you can see it over here. It's showing green on the left, and it's showing a figure of 185 over there. I think if you click it, doesn't do anything. But I'm just getting it. These are its settings. You can put a label in or other host name if you want to, but I've got a ping interval of every 60 seconds. I just want to know every now and again what my current ping speed is on the internet. And I'm just pinging 1.1.1.1, which is Cloudflare. Trip time, and I think that was the ping interval. So that really is sort of it. So these plugins are going to load automatically from the plugin folder. AUR installs them automatically there, but otherwise, if you're downloading and installing plugins, you're going to put them in the whatever your computer's folder is for plugins under GKrellM, and you can enable them and disable them here. So for example, I can enable the NVIDIA one. I can't even see where this one is enabling at the moment. It was working, but I just didn't really want to show it because I've already got the fan. I'm really only interested in the GPU temperature and the fan. And this does show it, but I've got that already monitored down here, so I'm not really too worried about it. But yes, there it is. And of course, you can also place, you can manually place these third-party ones where you want them. That really is the plugins. So yeah, that's really sort of it, I suppose. The fact of the matter really is you can add a whole bunch of monitors. Like I said, split these up into separate GKrellMs if you want to. It's a stack, essentially. Somebody did ask, but why can't this be horizontal across the top of the screen? And the reason for that really is because it's the way the stuff resizes. It's easier to resize these vertically, but if you had to put them all horizontally, apparently they'd have to then all be exactly the same height. So you see here, you can have narrow or higher heights here amongst these, and it stacks a lot easier, and that's really the only reason. So in summary, yeah, Conky, I don't know. I've got Conky working exactly the way I want it. I've got all the stuff set up. It's color-coded. Everything is working. I would say in theory, there's nothing stopping somebody setting up similar alarms, because these are often just triggering script files in many cases, or that sound where you hear it speaking the warning. That can be set up in Conky, but you are going to have to do everything manually in the config files, and you will certainly have to build up more if then else statements as well. From a graphical point of view, it is a lot easier and a lot quicker probably to get going with GKrellM. And then the other thing is it has got, as I said, a couple of interesting plugins. I've got most of what I want to do that is showing here on Conky already that I have got running in GKrellM. But I would also say for those that can't write their own plugin, or where you can't find a plugin, you can do just about anything with Conky. Conky, in a way, can also be incredibly powerful because you can look at a lot more detailed information that I've got that I'm pulling out of the GPU, that I'm pulling out of really script files that are running in the background for Conky to make use of. It's very much 6 of the one and half a dozen of the other, quite honestly. I'm already sitting now running both of them. I haven't really quite made my mind up which one I really would want to use. Do I want to use one of them? I don't know at this stage, to be very honest. If you look at Conky, for example, at the bottom here, you can specify what you want to see for the processes as well, and you've got complete manual control over how this is formatted. I can just say, I did have one little problem the other day with Conky. Suddenly, my NVIDIA stuff stopped working. Something changed, something updated. I don't think it was Conky. It might have been NVIDIA that updated something, but it broke a lot of my NVIDIA stuff. And instead of using the built-in Conky command to do bar graphs for, like I've got here for the CPU and for the uptime stuff, I had to revert to pulling that manually using a different command to pull the NVIDIA data out. So I've got it displaying here, but I've lost my bar graph. So, little things like that can happen. But again, plugins can stop being supported as well by GKrellM. So I wouldn't say it's foolproof either. So yes, you'll have to decide. This is really, it's up to you what you think is going to be easier. For most, I think it will be easier to get going with GKrellM. If you find limitations, maybe you can dive into Conky and look at that. But have a look at my other video on Conky. I've shared all my code that I'm using as well, so it's also fairly easy to get up and running if you want to use that. So thanks very much for watching, and stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video.